My name is Carmen Rathwald, and I live here in Napoleon, North Dakota. I was born and raised in Wishick, North Dakota, on a farm about 7.5 miles north and a bit west of town. And that is the same homestead that my father was raised on. My father was Edwin Rath, and his wife, my mother, was Helen Barbara Hauk Rath. Her parents were Adam and Rosina Lair Hauk, and they farmsteaded. It was north of our farmstead, probably about close to 10 miles. And my father grew up on the farm where I grew up, and his parents were John J. and Martha Lang Rath. So our history from the north of the Napoleon and, well, east of the Napoleon area and north of Wishick is kind of long. You know, we've been here a long time.
When you were a young girl, you grew up on a farm. What type of activities, what were some of the chores that you had to do?
Well, I grew up on the farm, and of course we had animals. My parents milked for a time, so I have memories of them milking the cows and squirting the cow's teats in the direction of the kitties to feed the kitties, and of course cleaning the milking machine. Oh my goodness, you know, washing all the cups, taking that cheesy substance that, you know, laid on the cups and washing them, but was important to do. So we had milk cows for a while. We had pigs for a while, so we would take the milk, leftover milk, and pour it in with grain into the pigs to slop the pigs. Plus, we gave them scraps from the house, and so I grew up with pigs. And we had beef cattle as well as dairy cattle. My dad and mother were very into, at that time, that was of course back in the 60s, polled Hereford cattle, which are all, you know, not so popular now, but at the time that was the breed to have. So, and we had horses. I grew up riding horses for a time after I moved back from California. I actually raised and trained horses and showed horses in horse shows. So that's all from my background. My mother rode horses. My dad loved horses. So. We had chickens. My parents loved the little fancy Banty chickens that would give the colored eggs. So we would have visitors to the farm at Easter time, and they'd have brown speckled eggs, and they'd have blue eggs and green eggs. And of course, everyone thought that we dyed them, and we hadn't, because that's just what the chickens of that breed produced. So yeah,
Blue eggs.
and yes, blue eggs, and green and brown speckled, and kind of a cream color with speckles, and yeah. And of course, we raised crops. The mainstay back when I was growing up was still wheat, wheat, oats, some flax, alfalfa for feed, and prairie hay that was always cut and baled for forage for food.
Did you
The
have
animals.
brothers and sisters?
I had none. I was the only child. And so I've had to deal my entire life with being told that I'm a spoiled only child. And I have to say that I feel like I was spoiled in terms of the attention that I got. My parents were very involved with everything that I did. Monetarily, not so much. Materialistically, it was tough. There were tough years. But I feel fortunate that I got the attention of my parents, my grandparents. Extended family was and still continues to be wonderful.
So, a young girl on the farm, did you learn to run all the equipment, and were you expected to run equipment?
Well, I had my certain jobs. My father was the mower, so he would cut all the prairie hay. My mother was an excellent raker. She used a wheel rake, and she was amazing. And a dump rake, and she could make the most beautiful rows. I was the baler, usually. So I broke a lot of shear pins and experienced that fun. And of course, I'd drive the tractor for when we were hauling the bales. As far as harvesting, I did run the combine. Um, the threshing machine, I ran a lot. I love the threshing machine because if you're familiar with the threshing machine, you start at one end of the field and you go through and you clean it. Everything is beautiful. You look back and the field is clean and looks gorgeous. The combine I ran, and I also did trucking for that aspect.
Do you think it was common for women, girls of your age, to run the equipment on farms when they were on farms?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. We were always, I mean, that was our mainstay. That's how we lived. So we were part of the family, and so children had their responsibilities. I had to get the cows in even as a very young girl because my parents stopped milking. I think I was probably 6 or 7. But prior to that, I had to go out into the prairie hills and get the cattle, bring them in, the dairy cows. So I was always involved, collecting eggs, and when they would butcher chickens, I was right there. I saw the heads being cut off and hopping around the yard, and I'd have to duck and get out of the way, and cleaning the pin feathers when we butchered. Every aspect, I would say, of farming, in some way, I was involved, and I think most children were.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school at Wishick, and I graduated from Wishick. And then I went to Dickinson State College for 1 year, and then I graduated from NDSU.
Was your family, would you consider them pro-education?
That's an interesting question. I was the first in the Rath family that actually went to college and graduated from a 4-year college. So that was kind of an anomaly. And I think my parents were very proud of that. But in this area, there is still that feeling of my husband, for example, he often says to me, yeah, I figured out what was wrong with that piece of equipment with a high school education. So it's a kind of a give and take on that.
How about when you were getting ready, you were in high school, and did you think that you'd be leaving the farm and coming back, or did you think you'd be leaving the farm?
Oh, absolutely. I thought that I was going to leave the farm, leave the community, never come back, never have anything to do with farming again. So, I went to college and I spent a little time in Fargo after graduation, and then I moved to California. And I worked for a number of years as a office manager, and then I took some classes and became a paralegal and worked in a law office in California. And found myself at 7:30 in the morning interviewing clients and working late in the law library at night. And it was wonderful. It was fabulous. The ocean is unbelievable. The opportunities for cultural activities were, beyond compare. But the call of the land and the people back here, I needed to come back. So for a time, I came back and I would work here in the summers, and I would go back and work in the winters for an employer that I had worked for before, and they were okay with me doing that. And so, but then my grandfather passed away, and the family farm, needed some help, and I thought, that should be me. And I've not regretted it. I loved California, but the call of North Dakota and my agricultural roots, very strong. And never would have known that as an 18-year-old, but when I came back, it was obvious to me that this is where I belong.
So when you were younger, in high school, college, the thought that you would actually marry a farmer was something?
Oh, my goodness. No. And my friends, none of us, oh, my goodness, we were not going to, ever have to feed a chicken again. We were never going to have to do any of those farm responsibilities. And we certainly weren't going to marry a farmer. No, absolutely not.
Of course, that went down the drain.
That went down the drain. That's
So
right.
tell us about, how did you meet your husband?
Well, I met my husband through a mutual friend of ours. And actually, I was bartending in Wishick, a little side job from working on the farm. And so my husband came into the bar with this friend, and the friend kind of introduced us. And, I didn't think too much of it. It was just another, a fellow, But it kind of started from there. Pretty soon I got flowers, and he was very chivalrous for a farmer.
So at some point then you got married and you moved
Yes.
on to a farm. Tell us about moving on to the farm. and
We
what
we
it's
have
like.
never lived on a farm. We married, and we have always lived here in Napoleon. But we farm my parents' land, my land now. So that's been in the family. It continues to be in our family. And, we've made some changes over the years. We've added llamas, and we have a billy goat. And our beef cattle are not polled Hereford. They're mostly baldy, black baldies, Angus, black Angus, red Angus, mixtures, So things have changed. We don't have chickens because we don't live on the farm. And really, if you have chickens, you have to have them nearby because they need that kind of constant care. So we have beef cattle, and we have llamas and the billy goat, and then we do crops. We do mostly now it's soybeans, some sorghum, things like that. And then my husband has a hay hauling business with a large truck. Bales and how you handle your prairie hay has changed so much. It used to be, of course, that they would stack it and put it on a huge pile of hay. And then later it became small bales. We called them idiot blocks, because it just was such hard work. With little bales, lifting them up on top of the stack on the trailers to haul them home. And now it is the great big bales that are wrapped. You see them oftentimes, so they have a wrap around them to protect them.
So we'll get back to your other job when we talk about
Yeah.
the job you're in now. But so you're a working woman and you still have responsibilities on the farm. How do you balance that?
Well, it's my husband also balances because he's a hay hauler. My son, who farms with us, also balances it because he's a cattle hauler. So we just kind of share responsibilities. We stop, for example, Monday, which was Labor Day, we got a call from our son who said, I need my truck moved so that I can unload. So we dropped what we were doing and we went out to the field. We moved the big truck, the semi, so that he could unload grain, and then we moved his pickup closer to where he was so that it would be easier for him to come home. And at that time of the day, it was later in the day, and so the grain, the stalks, the straw what we would call straw, that was getting tough. So he wasn't going to be out there much longer, but it just made it easier for him. So we accommodate. We do what we have to do to make it work. And certain times of the year, you just try to be even more available than others, and just flexibility.
Well, you tell me about your family,
My family, my immediate family, or my parents?
the family, you and your children.
Oh, well, my husband and I have 3 living children. We have Whitney Nicole, who is a social worker and works in Bismarck, and she has 2 children. And then our middle son, the cattle hauler, is Wyatt, and he's the farmer. He has farming in his blood. And then our youngest son just got married to a beautiful gal from Linton, also German-Russian. She was a home. Lindsay is her name, and his name is Wade. and he works at the gas plant in Mandan. It used to be Tesoro, and they've changed names several times, but he's a plant manager up there. So
You're happy that one of your offspring went into agriculture?
yes, it makes my heart happy to have a child that's involved with agriculture, and yet there's, you know, some fear because it's a wonderful life, but it's not an easy life. It's not an easy life. You know, the markets are so variable. You know, tariff issues and issues with, you know, crops and scab and ergot, and there are just so many issues that can complicate farming. But it's a wonderful life. And it's so important because without farmers, you know, we wouldn't be able to feed the world. So, and I really appreciate that commitment of farmers to raise the best quality crops that they possibly can to feed the world.
Before we get into the ag extension, what you do now, so I don't forget, when you think about farming, whether it was a young kid or even nowadays, what was your least favorite thing to do in agriculture?
My least favorite thing to do on the farm, I think, had to be picking rocks, because in the day when I was growing up, I remember we had a stone boat, which is a flat surface, low to the ground trailer, and we would have to pick up the rocks and put them on the stone boat, and then they would take the stone boat and dump it on a rock pile. Of course, nowadays the rock piles are buried and everything, and you have rock pickers. But, you know, a day of picking rocks could feel like a month. It was just, and, you know, and the rocks would vary from manageable to, you know, the bigger ones that you would have to roll and push onto the stone boat. So, yeah, that was probably my least favorite. My favorite, some of my favorite memories of doing things were working cattle. I always enjoyed that. I got to, you know, give shots or ear tag or that kind of thing. And always when I was able to ride horses, I enjoyed that very much. So yeah, working cattle would probably be my favorite, and picking rocks is my least favorite.
We were wondering how they got the big boulders into the
Yeah,
pile. So you
sometimes
rolled
you'd
them.
have to, you know, my mother and I would, or my dad and I would have to work together to get it on if it was too big.
Some of them were quite big, especially when we were down near Ashley and Zealand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like they have the rocks and then they have a little soil.
Yeah, well, we are at the edge of the Coteau, and so there's a lot of rock in this area. I have to laugh because I was reading a story about a woman who was traveling from Ellis Island out to Dakota Territory, and she looked out the windows and she was so concerned that there wouldn't be enough rocks to do, you know, sauerkraut, and they used rocks for a lot. So she had actually brought a rock along with her. So I imagine she was quite surprised when she found that there were a few rocks around.
I would agree with that. Why don't we ask about how did you get into what is your current position? How did you get started in your current position?
I am the Logan County Extension Agent, and my focus is family and community wellness. My particular passion is economic development and leadership. I actually went back to college when I returned from California and got a teaching degree. And so I was fortunate enough to be interviewed for a couple of different positions. I interviewed where I student taught, which was in Hazleton at the school. There was still a school in the old Hazleton High School, and that's where I student taught. And I was offered a position there as an English teacher, and at the same time I was offered a position here as an egg agent, focusing on the family and community wellness
So how long have you been doing that?
I'm in my 27th year. Yeah, 27 years.
Why don't you tell me a little bit more about your job and what you like about your job and how it's connected to agriculture?
Well, my job is all about agriculture. And I have said in the past that if you live in North Dakota, it's hard to find a job that isn't connected to agriculture because, of course, agriculture is our #1 industry and so important. So my job, when I began working, I did a lot of work with, let's say, the homemakers groups, um, community organizations. I would go to the senior citizens organizations and so forth. I did some work with food preservation, raising children, you know, all aspects of community and family wellness. So that has evolved a bit in that now with the advent of the internet, I do a lot of putting out fires, I would say, a lot of control of rumor control, because what I find is people will go online and they will learn, oh, I can by putting my chickens in a jar and I put it in a boiling water canner and then I turn them upside down on my counter and they seal and it's perfect. And it says so on the internet. So that's one thing that I really appreciate about my job is because everything in Extension is research-based. And so I know that the information that I'm giving is safe and has been tested over time. Also, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity within Extension to work on economic and development and leadership in my community to help to make the citizens or give the citizens tools so that they can be more effective in their leadership roles in the communities. And also I get to spend a lot of time in the schools and work with the youth, which is another one of my loves. I especially like those middle school kids that a lot of teachers find to be a little bit challenging, but I love their enthusiasm and I like to see their involvement in their communities and their involvement in agriculture. So that gives me pleasure. I enjoy that very much.
Carmen, in your 27 years in in the extension, doing what you do, have you seen that the topics have changed?
Oh yes, yes. Topics have definitely changed. You know, let's talk about crops, for example. With crops, you know, the diseases, everything is always changing and evolving. You know, a weed will adapt to its environment and become stronger, and so you need to focus on the science behind weed control. So that changes the way things look. But even going farther back, you know, this area, the Tri-County area, used to be, many of the communities were known as wheat capitals. They called them wheat capitals. So in the 1920s, there was, you know, mostly wheat. Now, you know, there's a good amount of soybeans and corn and not as much wheat. So things have changed and evolved a great deal. Challenges for children have, you know, evolved a great deal. We deal with bullying issues and problems that probably have always been there in some form or another. I mean, I remember the town kids versus the farm kids back in the 60s and the plowboys, you know, that got teased because they might have had to do chores before they went to school, so they were out in the barns and they probably smelled like it too when they got to school. But the bullying is still there. It's just evolved. It's a little different. So things from bullying to the science behind raising crops, animals, even family dynamics have really changed. My husband and I are foster parents, licensed foster parents, and it's heartbreaking to see these children that are from homes where they weren't fortunate enough to grow up like my husband and I did, in a well-grounded family that expected the children to be an involved part of the family. So I do want to say that most of our foster children come from outside the area. So this is a little bit of a protected area in that the people here value those family ties and have been able to some extent, maintain, the ideal or the typical two-parent families. But even that has changed. I mean, it used to be that moms used to be able to stay home. My mother, for example, didn't work outside the home until she was basically retired off the farm. They still had the farm, but she was retired off the farm. And she worked in the library in Wishick. And then she worked at the nursing home in the kitchen. Nowadays, many farm wives work off the farm. A lot of times it's for the insurance, but that's way more typical than it would have been, say, in the 60s. And a little bit is, since I started in the past almost 30 years. So,
Pardon me. No. Do you think the role of women, or how has the role of women changed from, let's say, your grandparents' day to the present day? Has the role of women in agriculture changed? Have you seen it change?
I don't really think that the role of women in agriculture has changed much as far as what they do. I mean, if we go back to when, even prior to North Dakota and South Dakota being Dakota Territory, back to, say, the 1100s, the Native American women were here and they were the agriculturalists. They were planting the Three Sisters, the squash and the corn and the beans. And the men were the hunters and the scavengers. Women were the agriculturalists. So when the Germans from Russia came to this country, the women were very involved with caring for the animals, with even, I remember hearing stories of women leading the workhorses around and around in circles over the bed of grain to knock the grain off of the stalks. Women were always involved, and certainly with care of animals, because that was just an extension of nurturing. They cared for their children, they cared for the animals. So, and that was something that was common in the old country, where they had, a lot of times the houses were connected to the barns. When they came here, that changed a bit, but still there's a strong connection for that nurturing ability of women. What I do think has changed for women is the recognition. The recognition, for example, in the past, it was always, the man was the farmer. Are you married to a farmer? Yes, I'm married to a farmer. Well, you are just as much of a farmer as he is. In the 60s, they were just as involved. A lot of times they did the bookkeeping as well. The decision making, probably a little bit stronger on the male side, but maybe not so much anymore. Now it's changed. But the biggest change in women's role in agriculture is the fact that they're finally getting recognition. I know that you interviewed Rita Mossett and Sue Kleingardner, and both of those women are from within German-Russian country. Both of those women were recognized by Farm and Ranch Guide, and they were actually 2 of 6 finalists in their 2018 Farm and Ranch Guide Country Women of the Year, and Rita actually was the winner. And so that's not just from the 3-county area, that's statewide and beyond South Dakota as well. So the recognition is finally coming. I think Rita said it in an article in, I believe it was the Bismarck Tribune. She said someone had come up to her at some point in her life and said, "Oh, you're so lucky you don't have to work." And she was sort of speechless because, farm women are very, very hardworking people. It's astonishing, really. That's something that I am so appreciative of and amazed by, is the work ethic of farmers and agriculturalists in general.
Do you think the perception from men and even from women about uh, single women, or women that are the farmers and the husband might be doing the job, has that changed?
I'll say
Or
that
is
again.
it still there? That's what I got. Is there a stigma that still might be attached to a woman who was working on the farm, like maybe after her husband died? Donna, who we interviewed the other day, who worked for a couple years and ran the farm, she felt that there was like, oh, well, she ought to get married and that sort of thing.
Okay, I understand.
A single person, or Lori, who is a single woman who's never been married, running the farm. Do you feel that there's still, it might be a stigma?
I think, that there is a perception that women ought not to be the primary farmer in the family. Although when Germans from Russia first came to North Dakota, there were many women that homesteaded on their own, and a homestead was such that you had to live on the property. So if you were a single woman and you came here, there were a good number, if you go back and look at the numbers of women that were homesteading their own land, there was a good number of them. Some of them were married, and they lived on their homestead, and their husband lived on the other homestead. I think in Ashley there's a couple that wrote a diary about living next to each other in two houses right on the border of the two homesteads. And of course there is some of that male chauvinism, we would have called it in the 60s, as far as that is concerned. And I can imagine that women like Donna, who lost their husbands early in their marriage, did feel that, the stigma of being alone on the farm. Would she be able to handle it? Could she deal with it? And you know what? You bet she could. There was a lot of grit, and a lot of, these women are very, they have very strong characters, and they're able to withstand so much, and it's really mind-boggling. I have a story, if you have a minute.
I got plenty of minutes.
Okay. My godmother told me this story, and actually it would have been a great uncle of mine. He married a Deagle, which my godmother was a Deagle, and they moved to this farm that was a Deagle farm. And the woman of the house, Matilda, had her first baby in the house, because of course childbirth was done at home. And she had her baby in the house, and she died, and her baby died. And not long after, my great uncle married her sister. I guess what my point is, just like in Hague, when you go down to the cemetery and you see on the west side of the cemetery all those little babies' graves, row after row after row. One family lost, many children. And can you imagine waking up in the morning, having lost yet another child, and having to put one foot in front of the other and feed the rest that were in the house? These women were tough, hardworking, resourceful, creative, and continue to be so. That's the stock that we come from, and hopefully we will be able to instill those same values in the upcoming generation. That's my hope, that the children that are graduating from these schools in the area will always learn from and respect their heritage and their culture, because it has so much to teach them, and it can give them so much, can give them the grounding that we all could use in today's world.
Why don't we talk about the extension service? Give us a little idea what the extension
Okay.
service is,
Yes.
what it's providing for the farmers, and then specifically how it's helped women in agriculture over the years.
Holy cow, that's a lot of stuff, Bob.
That is a lot of stuff, yes.
Okay. Well, the NDSU Extension Service really began before it got that formal name. When the Smith-Lever Act passed, I believe it was in 1887, NDSU became a land-grant university. And so that was the beginning. And then about 1914, the Smith-Lever Act was passed, and that formed the extension services across the nation. Extension services are unique as an organization because they have a presence in the county. So it is the university represented in each of the counties. So our 53 counties have somewhat of a representation of the university. And the university, the Extension Service provided at that time research-based information, gave information about what crops would work here, what animals would do best, gave them some background, some grounding, some ideas of marketing. Even in those days, marketing was a huge issue. I just went on a tour in Bismarck of the old Camp Hancock, and they talked about how when it came to grain marketing, the political figures in Bismarck had a huge impact on these small surrounding counties because the farmers would take their wagons and haul their grain to the mills, and then the mills would send it by railroad and would eventually end up in St. Paul. And there was a good feeling or a general feeling that the immigrants were taken advantage of. And so that changed when, well, there were a number of things that affected it. John Burke became governor in, I think it was 1907, and some of those things politically changed. And then when the Extension Service came on in 1914, it had a profound effect as well on how marketing could be done. And of course now we have the North Dakota Mill, and so marketing opportunities have changed in a huge, huge way. So now we have to talk about international markets, and of course Extension has got their fingers on the pulse of that, on international marketing, puts and calls and things that our great-grandparents would never have had an idea of, have become, parts of general conversation in farmers' language today. So the Extension Service has really helped with that. On the home front, teaching people how to preserve foods, how to prepare foods safely, how to bring variety to the table, how to do, field to fork, so to speak, has been huge, as well as, family issues and just helping bring good information down to the county levels.
Has that evolved over the years, though? When there might be more of an emphasis on family now than there would have been originally?
Well, I think the emphasis has changed somewhat. I mean, when Extension started, and then the homemakers came into play, and a 4-H, into play in the 1930s. The farmer, or the women, as far as the family and family and community educators is what homemakers evolved into. It started out as primarily a social group because these women kind of craved getting together with other women to talk about their raising their children and cooking and all sorts of issues like that. So the Extension Service provided the vehicle by which these women could get together on a regular basis and discuss mutual concerns and topics of that nature. So, and then 4-H, you know, has grown and evolved. And, you know, when I started, there was a saying that they said, 4-H is more than cows and plows. And of course now the STEM, the science, technology, engineering has changed the whole face of 4-H as well. Yes, we still show animals, and they do a tremendous job of that. But they also know about GPS technology and drones, and you know, they're learning all sorts of engineering tools and things about running a farm in a different way. So,
So,
does that help?
yeah, I think so. I'm trying to get out, I'm trying to make sure I cover the extension angle. I mean, it's not going to be huge, but we need to get that in there. But what do you think the importance of extension has been to women in agriculture? What if you were, and I am asking you, what do you think the most important thing extension has done to enhance women's role in agriculture? What would that be?
Well, I think the role of women as leaders has really come to the fore. There are a number of extension agents who have just received awards for programming, such as Annie's Project, which is a program that teaches women about all aspects of farming, of running a farm, everything from marketing, puts and calls, to bookkeeping, etc. But women in extension now comprise a larger number than the men in extension. So in the 53 counties, we have 30-some women in the role of ag agent, which is not the role that I carry, but in the role of ag agent, there are more women than there are men. So the evolution has been fairly rapid, actually, because the first female ag agent was in Emmons County. That was Lynette Nusima, and that was back in, I believe, 1976. And then we had a female extension director, Sharon Anderson, who was the only female extension director ever. But after Lynette was an ag agent in 76, since then the female presence as ag agents has exploded. So.
Would you say at the same time, and this can just be an impression, that more women are going into agriculture and higher education than, let's say, when you were going to college?
Absolutely. I feel that young women are looking at opportunities in agriculture for their futures in a much bigger way than they did when I graduated from NDSU. So whether it be as an agronomist or a farm manager or someone who's selling seed, or a nutrient manager for an elevator, there's a much more of an interest. And there's much more of an interest in general in moving to the small towns. I was just reading an old Times magazine article from a good 20 years ago about how the influx of city folks to the country and to North Dakota has really changed. But with technology now and the internet, and we have good connections here in North Dakota, so those opportunities to work in small town North Dakota and do a whole host of jobs, whether directly connected to a farming operation or, you know, working as a marketer or some other aspect is more available than it's ever been.
Young lady comes to you, young woman comes to you and says, I'm thinking of, yeah, go ahead. I'm thinking of going into agriculture as a career or as a lifestyle. And I want your advice if it's a good idea or a bad idea. What would you say? What are the attraction? What would be the benefits of going into agriculture if you're a young lady?
I think the attraction or the benefits of living on a farm, working in agriculture for a woman now are just as powerful as they've ever been. You know, there is nothing like waking up in the morning, looking out over the fields with your cup of coffee, anticipating the work of the day, working with your family, working with your children, and providing, again, food for the world. I mean, that's what farmers do. They feed the world. Is there anything else that could be more rewarding? I can't imagine. So I think if a woman is prepared for what is to come, because there's tough times too. You know, it's not a 9 to 5 by any means, and it's not a regular paycheck at the end of 2 weeks. You know, there are challenges, but the benefits for working in agriculture, to me, far outweigh any detriment.